Welcome to the Doge Diaries, diving deep into government efficiency. So Musk and Ramaswamy are on the Hill, talking government waste. $2 trillion in cuts? Ambitious, to say the least.
Yeah, ambitious might be an understatement. It's a catchy headline, sure, but where do they actually plan to find these supposed savings? The articles mention regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, but $2 trillion.
Well, they're looking at everything. They mentioned cutting regulations, a perennial favorite, streamlining agencies, maybe offering early retirement, and ending remote work for federal employees, hoping for voluntary terminations, as they put it.
Right, because forcing people back into the office is such a proven cost-saving measure.
They're going for those big structural changes. They argue that previous administrations just nibbled around the edges. This time, they're aiming for the core, upending the status quo.
Upending things without a clear plan can be dangerous, though, right? The articles mention concerns about harming essential services. Plus, there's that little issue of mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Those programs eat up a huge chunk of the budget.
They know that. They've talked about looking at programs that might not have explicit congressional authorization, areas where funds are being misspent. And of course, defense spending is a huge target. Almost half of discretionary spending goes to the DoD.
So they're going after the military-industrial complex. That's a brave move, even for Musk. I mean, he does have government contracts.
It's all part of the plan. They specifically mentioned the F-35 program as a potential area for review. And remember, this DOGE thing isn't a formal government agency. It's a presidential advisory commission. They'll work with the OMB to propose reforms, but Congress still has the final say.
Which means it's likely to get bogged down in political wrangling. Has there ever been a bipartisan agreement on cutting $2 trillion from the budget?
Well, some Democrats are expressing interest. Sanders agreed with Musk on cutting military spending. Moskowitz and Khanna mentioned it too. Even a bipartisan DOGE caucus has formed in the House.
A DOGE caucus? Seriously? Okay, so there might be some common ground on military cuts, but that's a small slice of the overall budget. I'm still skeptical about the $2 trillion figure.
Even Womack, who supports the concept, expressed concerns about reaching that number. It's a massive undertaking, but they say they're focused on GDP growth, not just deficit reduction. So maybe that's how they're justifying it.
We'll see. Color me skeptical. A lot of this sounds like political posturing. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
So Musk and Ramaswamy, huh? A dynamic duo for government efficiency. $2 trillion in cuts? That's a lot. Like a whole lot.
It's a bold claim, right? Almost unbelievable. Where's the meat on the bones? They talk about regulatory rescissions, streamlining agencies, but $2 trillion? It seems disconnected from reality.
Well, they're talking about ending remote work for federal employees to encourage voluntary terminations. Sounds a little coercive, no?
A little? It sounds like they're trying to force people out. Is that really a cost-saving measure? Or just a way to, reshape the workforce?
They also mentioned cutting programs, slashing regulations, the usual suspects. But they insist this time is different. They're going for the core, they say, upending the status quo.
Upending things can be dangerous. What about essential services and mandatory spending? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those are huge. You can't just wish them away.
They've mentioned targeting programs without explicit congressional authorization, areas of misspent funds, and, of course, defense spending.
The military-industrial complex. A brave target, even for Musk, especially considering his government contracts. But realistically, how much can they actually cut from defense?
They specifically mentioned the F-35 program, which, is a perennial target for cuts. And remember, DOGE is just an advisory commission. Congress still holds the purse strings.
Meaning it'll likely get bogged down in political gridlock. Has there ever been bipartisan agreement on cutting $2 trillion?
Well, there's some surprising common ground. Sanders agreed with Musk on military cuts, Moskowitz wants to restructure Homeland Security, and Khanna, well, he's mentioned it too.
A DOGE caucus? Seriously? Okay, some agreement on military cuts, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to $2 trillion. I remain highly skeptical.
So, Musk and Ramaswamy, this DOGE initiative, it's ambitious, right? $2 trillion in cuts? I mean, where's the beef?
Right? It sounds like a headline grabber. $2 trillion. But Womack's point about the budget structure is key. Mandatory spending, interest on the debt. That doesn't leave much wiggle room in discretionary spending.
Exactly. And even within discretionary, half goes to defense. So are they planning on gutting the military or everything else? Education, transportation?
Well, they've talked about cutting programs, regulations, ending remote work. But even with all that, $2 trillion seems unrealistic. Like, how many federal employees would have to quit to reach that number?
And then there's the political reality. Trump pledged not to touch Social Security or Medicare. Those are huge chunks of mandatory spending. So where are these mythical savings coming from?
It's a bit of a mystery. Johnson dodged the question about cuts versus entitlements. Maybe they're banking on some magical economic growth to offset the cuts.
Maybe. They did mention GDP growth, but it feels like they're putting the cart before the horse. Cut first, ask questions later. Risky strategy.
Definitely risky. And with Congress holding the purse strings, it's likely to become a political football. Can you imagine the gridlock?
Oh, absolutely. Even with this supposed bipartisan Doge caucus, Bean, Sessions, Ernst, Scott, and even some Democrats showing some interest in reducing military spending with Sanders, Moskowitz, Khanna, $2 trillion? I'm highly skeptical.
Me too. Color me skeptical. It all sounds good on paper, but the devil's in the details. And those details seem rather scarce. A lot of this feels like political theater, you know?
So Musk and Ramaswamy advising on government efficiency, it's an interesting pairing, right? No real public service experience between them.
Yeah, a bit unconventional. Lots of private sector experience, sure, but government's a different beast. And Musk's ties to Trump, the campaign donations, the whole X thing, it raises eyebrows.
Well, they're enthusiastic about Trump's agenda, that's clear. And this Doge initiative, Department of Government Efficiency, it's not even officially part of the government.
Which is precisely why Public Citizen is raising concerns. No ethics checks, no background checks. They're basically operating outside the usual channels.
They're arguing for transparency, equal representation, public input, standard operating procedure for advisory panels.
Exactly. Especially when you're talking about $2 trillion in cuts. That's not small potatoes. You need a balanced, transparent process, not something rigged to benefit, insiders.
Right? And the budget situation, $6 trillion running a huge deficit. Republicans blaming spending, Democrats blaming tax cuts. It's the same old story.
It is. And where are those cuts going to come from? Social Security, Medicare, defense, those are the big ticket items. And they're all politically sensitive.
Khanna's point about the defense budget is interesting, though. He wants Musk to testify, recommend cuts. I mean, Musk does have those government contracts, so...
Yeah? It's a bit of a conflict of interest, isn't it? He profits from government spending, but he's supposed to be advising on how to cut it.
And Khanna's also skeptical about non-defense cuts. He doesn't see Congress touching education, Social Security, Medicare, not if they want to win in 2026.
Makes sense. Those are third-rail issues. So $2 trillion in cuts, it all sounds very ambitious. But where are the details? It feels like a lot of smoke and mirrors.
So Musk and Ramaswamy leading a charge on government efficiency, huh? It's an interesting choice.
Interesting is one word for it. Two titans of industry trying to tame the federal behemoth. It's a bit like bringing a scalpel to a demolition derby.
Well, they're certainly aiming high. Dismantle is a strong word. They're talking trillions in cuts. Trillions. By 2026, ambitious, to say the least.
Ambitious? It's borderline delusional. Where are these mythical trillions going to come from? They mention regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, but trillions.
They're looking at everything, apparently. Regulations, of course, a perennial favorite. Streamlining agencies, early retirement, even ending remote work to encourage, shall we say, voluntary departures.
Voluntary departures. That sounds like a euphemism for forced attrition. Is that really a path to efficiency or just a way to reshape the workforce?
Well, they're talking about identifying programs without explicit congressional authorization. Misspent funds, And of course, the big one, defense spending.
The military-industrial complex, a brave target. But even if they slash the defense budget, that still leaves a huge gap to reach those trillions.
They're also looking at healthcare spending, Medicare in particular. And apparently, tax code spending is on the table too.
So everything's on the table? Except I imagine Social Security? That's always the third rail of budget cuts. No politician wants to touch that.
Well, it's DOGE, right? The Department of Government Efficiency. Sounds impressive, although it's really just an advisory commission. They can propose all they want, but Congress still holds the purse strings. Gridlock's practically guaranteed.
Exactly. And even if they manage to identify some wasteful spending, which, let's be honest, is likely, getting those cuts through Congress, good luck with that. It'll be a bloodbath.
So, Musk and Ramaswamy want to dismantle the federal government, huh? That's a bold goal.
Dismantle? Well, dismantle might be a bit strong. They're talking about efficiency, right? Cutting waste, fraud, and abuse.
Efficiency. They're talking trillions in cuts. Trillions. That's not efficiency. That's major surgery.
Yeah, $2 trillion by 2026. It's an eye-popping number, almost unbelievable.
And they're going after the F-35. Lockheed Martin's not going to like that. That's a powerful lobby.
True, but the F-35 has been plagued with cost overruns and delays. It's a ripe target, shall we say.
Ripe, yes, but politically sensitive. Lots of jobs depend on that program.
Jobs, yes, but also national security. It's a complex issue.
And how are they planning to achieve these cuts? This DOGE thing, it's just an advisory commission, right? No real power.
Exactly. They can propose, but Congress disposes. And with the current political climate, gridlock is almost guaranteed.
They're talking about working with the OMB, proposing structural reforms, but reforms take time. And $2 trillion in cuts by 2026? That's a tight deadline.
A tight deadline, indeed. And have they actually worked in government before? It's a different beast than the private sector.
Not really. Musk has his connections, of course. But actual public service experience, not so much.
Which is why some experts are questioning their understanding of the federal government's complexities. It's not as simple as running a tech company.
Right? And even if they manage to identify areas of waste, fraud, and inefficiency, actually implementing those cuts, that's a whole other battle.
Vested interests, bureaucratic inertia, those are powerful forces. They'll fight tooth and nail to protect their turf.
They mentioned previous commissions, some successes, some failures, hundreds of thousands of job cuts in one case, apparently. But that was a different time, a different political climate.
Different time, different context. This DOGE initiative, it's a long shot, to say the least. A lot of ifs, ands, and buts.